Hi, this is Ray from Honey Top Bees. If your bees are starving and it's August, it's time to pull out some feeders, or your bees may not make it through the winter. Let's talk about today feeding and nutrition as a way to prepare your bees for wintertime. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I was a new beekeeper was I failed to check and see if my bees had proper nutrition, carbohydrates and protein, especially going into the winter. So let's talk about getting ready for the winter today by making sure our bees are properly nourished. This is the second in our series of videos that I just want to kind of talk to you out here in my bee yard about getting your bees ready for winter. And in this video, let's talk a little bit about the importance of nutrition for your bees, especially in the summer. So the time of the recording of this video is August. My location is in the southeast corner of the United States. In my area of the country, our nectar flow is April, May, the beginning of June. But by the middle of June, all the way through the end of August, at the time of this recording, we are in what's called the summer dearth, which means that there are very few resources in the environment for our bees. It doesn't mean that there's zero resources. They still find a little bit of pollen on a flower here or there and some nectar, but certainly not enough to sustain the hive. We're definitely in negative nutrition here, where they're going to have to eat what they have reserved inside of their hive to supplement whatever they may find foraging in the environment. So we call that the summer dearth. As the dearth moves through the summer and into the early fall, it's very important that your bees have proper nutrition so that they can produce the royal jelly that's needed to feed the eggs that the queen may be laying this time of year. And if they don't have the proper nutrition to be able to do that, the worker bees will literally come behind the queen because they need that protein, and they will eat the eggs or eat the larvae for protein for themselves, rather than producing bees that are going to survive the winter. And so if this nutrition issue is not addressed, you're not going to have a big enough population for your bees to be able to overwinter in a healthful manner. And so your bees need two essential things to be able to make it through the winter. They need honey, or the equivalent of a carbohydrate like sugar water, and they need pollen, or a protein source, to be able to produce that royal jelly and feed that young larva. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I was a new beekeeper was that I just really didn't pay attention to feeding my bees as much as possible. But how it works, at least in my area of the country, is this: is when I take my honey off in June, even if I leave them sufficient honey in June, there's not enough honey there for them to overwinter with. By this time of year, because our summers are in such a dearth period, they've eaten up everything that I left them when I pulled honey off back in June. And so my hives are, down to 1 frame of nectar, 2 frames of honey. There's just not that much inside of them. There seems to be more pollen than there is nectar or honey inside of the hives, but they need both. And so this time of year, it's super important that you feed your bees. And so what I do is 2 things. Number 1, I provide them with a pollen substitute source that I open feed inside the yard. Open feeding pollen doesn't create a swarm like open feeding of nectar can sometimes create if you have a lot of hives on the same property. And the bees have been going at that pollen source for quite a while, bringing it back into their hives. And I can see it inside of the hives, inside of the frame. And so that gives them some sort of a protein source. I know there's a lot of different studies about how efficient a pollen substitute is versus an actual pollen. But in my estimation, feeding my bees something, even if it's not quite as efficient or effective as the natural pollen source, is still better than feeding them nothing. And then secondly is sugar water. Sugar water is the equivalent, or not the equivalent, but is similar to nectar in constitution, and it provides the carbohydrates that the colony needs in order to survive. And so I feed sugar water inside of my hives, preparing them for winter, one of 2 ways. I open feed using a trickle feeding system that slowly and consistently all day long the bees can come and get it. I used to feed with an open 5-gallon pail, that with a bucket that you flip over, or I'll show you some pictures here, or with a raft inside of it. But I just found that I just had 100,000 bees on top of that, and many bees died as a result of it. So I've kind of changed to a slower system, a trickle feeding system, which I'll show you right here. But problem with the open feeding of a trickle feeding system is simply this for me. I don't know if the bees, rather the colonies of bees that need that sugar water, are actually getting it. And sometimes I know that they're not getting it when I go in and do an inspection, and I see some hives that are getting weaker. So I definitely also feed internally with frame feeders through this time of year, sugar water, so that I know that the colonies are getting and have a resource to be able to obtain the carbohydrates that they need to be able to not only maintain the colony, but also continue the reproductive cycle inside the colony, so that I make sure my populations are strong going into the winter, and that there's enough bees that are bees of winter physiology that live 5 months in order to sustain the colony throughout the winter time. So this is our second video in preparing your bees for winter. Today we focused on feeding and nutrition. And if you look on my channel, you'll see a third video that's coming that's talking about disease and pests, preparing our hives for winter by making sure that our disease and pests are taken care of. I hope you'll watch that one when it comes out soon. God bless. When you hit like, subscribe, or leave a comment, it really helps me to build my channel. So thank you so much.